Ferrari brought the third major upgrade of the season for the SF26 to Zandvoort. 5 components were changed at once: the floor body, the floorboard, the floor edge, the diffuser, and the beam wing. A package this large is rare, because teams usually test individual components separately to isolate their effect clearly. Ferrari chose the full package this time, which raised the risk if something failed to work together. Under current technical regulations, the floor and diffuser are the primary sources of underfloor downforce on these cars, while the beam wing sits beneath the rear wing and links the rear-end aerodynamics to the diffuser's airflow. Changing all 5 elements in the same weekend meant that any imbalance in the car's aerodynamic platform would be harder to trace back to a single source. In the first free practice session, Lewis Hamilton immediately showed that the new package could work. He set the 4th fastest time, only 0.190 seconds behind session leader Kimi Antonelli. For Ferrari, this was a promising signal, since the gap to the top was as small as it had been all season. The engineers took it as confirmation that the new floor was genuinely generating more downforce without destroying the car's balance. A gap under 0.2 of a second in a single free practice session is considered a strong indicator on a circuit like Zandvoort, where the banked corners and narrow track width tend to punish cars with poor mechanical balance more severely than on flatter circuits. But between first practice and sprint qualifying, Ferrari made setup changes that destroyed exactly that balance. Hamilton dropped to P7 in sprint qualifying, well off his practice pace. His teammate Charles Leclerc, running the identical upgrade, climbed to P3 instead. Leclerc finished nearly 0.6 of a second clear of Hamilton, despite both drivers running identical hardware. This gap between 2 cars with the same equipment points clearly to the setup, not the new component package, as the cause of Hamilton's shortfall. In Formula One, setup covers variables such as ride height, wing angle, differential settings, and suspension geometry, all adjustable within the same aerodynamic package, and all capable of producing large swings in lap time if miscalculated for the specific demands of a circuit. While Ferrari dealt with a self-inflicted setup problem, Kimi Antonelli made a mistake of his own. On his very first flying lap in the opening segment of sprint qualifying, he ran off track at the penultimate corner and through the gravel trap. According to the team, this excursion cost him 25 points of downforce, a significant loss for the rest of the session. A loss of that magnitude typically results from debris or gravel becoming lodged in the floor or diffuser, disrupting the sealed airflow the car depends on for its underfloor performance. Antonelli had to settle for P5 in sprint qualifying, behind pole-sitter George Russell, who set a time of 1 minute and 11.567 seconds. The contrast between the 2 errors of the session is notable. Hamilton's was a team-caused setup problem, while Antonelli's was a self-inflicted driving mistake, and the 2 cases illustrate the different ways a Saturday qualifying session can unravel for a title contender. In the sprint race itself, Russell converted pole into a win. Behind him, Leclerc passed Lando Norris for second place using overtake mode on lap 18. Overtake mode gives a driver a temporary boost in deployable electrical power, similar in function to DRS but governed by a separate allocation system, and its use in that moment proved decisive for the final sprint result. Antonelli finished the sprint in P4, while Hamilton, still hampered by his poor qualifying result, could only manage P7. After the sprint, the standings had shifted. Antonelli now led Hamilton by 53 points, while Russell had closed to within 3 points of Hamilton. That shift meant 3 drivers were now separated by fewer than 60 points with a significant portion of the season still remaining, keeping the championship fight open on multiple fronts rather than a straightforward 2-driver battle. Following the sprint race, 5 drivers came under scrutiny from the stewards. Hamilton, Max Verstappen, Yuki Tsunoda, Lance Stroll, and Valtteri Bottas were investigated for stopping before safety car line 1 on their way to the grid. Safety car line 1 is a fixed marker on the circuit, and cars are required to maintain a minimum pace past it during the formation process. Stopping short of that line before reaching the grid is treated as a potential procedural breach under the sporting regulations. All 5 drivers were ultimately cleared, with no penalty issued. The stewards explained their decision by noting that the grid had been extremely crowded at the time. This investigation applied only to these 5 drivers and ended without any consequence for them, meaning none of the 5 carried a grid or time penalty into the Grand Prix. Separate from that case, another incident was under review. Carlos Sainz was warned for a different infringement, an overtake during the formation lap. This case has no connection to the investigation involving the other 5 drivers and should not be conflated with it. Sainz received only a warning, with no time or grid penalty attached, which meant his grid position for the Grand Prix remained unaffected by the incident. For the actual Grand Prix qualifying session, held separately with a new grid, conditions changed again. Rain arrived late in the 3rd qualifying segment, presenting the drivers with new challenges. Wet weather qualifying at Zandvoort is considered particularly demanding because of the circuit's banked corners, which reduce visibility and grip in ways that differ from flatter, more conventional layouts. Norris claimed pole position under these wet conditions with a time of 1 minute and 11.163 seconds, putting him 0.102 seconds clear of Russell. Antonelli recovered from his sprint mistake and qualified in P3, while his teammate Oscar Piastri took P4. Hamilton showed a clear improvement in this session, finishing P5. This result suggests that Ferrari had at least partially corrected the setup problem that had held him back in sprint qualifying. The turnaround from P7 to P5 within the same weekend indicates that the team identified and adjusted at least some of the variables responsible for the earlier imbalance. Leclerc, who had qualified P3 in the sprint, could only manage P6 in Grand Prix qualifying. For Verstappen, the session was disappointing. He qualified just P7, his worst home qualifying result since the race's return to Zandvoort in 2021. Verstappen has historically been one of the strongest performers at this circuit, having taken pole position in several editions since the race returned to the calendar, which makes this result a marked departure from his usual form at his home event. Looking ahead to Sunday, the drivers' standings show a tight battle at the top. Antonelli leads with 224 points, followed by Hamilton on 171 points, a gap of 53 points. Behind him sits Russell on 168 points, just 3 points behind Hamilton. With Antonelli, Hamilton, and Russell separated by only 56 points combined between first and third, the championship fight now involves 3 drivers rather than a straightforward two-way contest between Antonelli and Hamilton. One statistical detail clearly favors Norris. Every Dutch Grand Prix since the race's return in 2021 has been won from pole position. That makes Norris the favorite heading into Sunday, based on a pattern that has held across every edition of the race so far this decade. The central question for the race is whether Ferrari's Saturday setup correction holds up on Sunday, or whether the problem from practice and sprint qualifying resurfaces over race distance. Hamilton's jump from P7 in the sprint to P5 in Grand Prix qualifying shows a clear improvement within a matter of hours. Whether that progress holds over 72 laps, as tire wear, balance shifts, and changing track conditions place additional strain on the car, will only become clear in the race itself. A setup that works over a single flying lap does not always hold up across a full race distance, particularly when tire degradation and fuel load changes alter how a car's balance behaves compared to a qualifying simulation. Leclerc's drop from P3 in the sprint to P6 in qualifying also raises the question of how stable Ferrari's progress actually is, given how much the two drivers' positions shifted within the same weekend. With Hamilton improving by 2 positions and Leclerc dropping by 3 between the 2 sessions, the 2 Ferrari drivers effectively swapped trajectories over the course of the weekend, despite running the same 5-part upgrade package throughout. That inconsistency between 2 cars on identical specification remains the central unresolved issue for Ferrari heading into the race, separate from whichever result the team ultimately achieves on Sunday.